Everglades is threatening the area's sprawling ecosystem. Burmese pythons are apex predators at the top of the food chain.
Right now, as you watch this, a silent apocalypse is unfolding in the heart of the Florida Everglades. For decades, a $31 billion ecosystem has been swallowed whole by an invader that shouldn't be here. We tried elite hunters, we tried infrared drones, we even tried robotic decoys, and we failed. But then, Florida did something so radical, so controversial, that the world literally laughed. They released hundreds of snake killers into the wild. Today, we're going deep into the Blackwater to reveal why the laughter has finally stopped. But before we descend into that darkness, do me a quick favor, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Because what you're about to see isn't just another wildlife story. It's a full-blown ecological war that most people still don't even realize is happening. To understand why Florida is desperate enough to release hundreds of snakes to fight other snakes, we have to go back to the early 1990s. This wasn't a crisis that started with a bang, it started with a whisper and a pet trade that grew out of control. The Burmese python is a marvel of evolution in its native Southeast Asia. There it is kept in check by king cobras, tigers, and leopard cats. But in the 1980s, these apex predators were imported by the thousands into South Florida as status pets. In August 1992, Hurricane Andrew, a Category 5 monster, ripped through Miami. It flattened a reptile breeding facility near the Everglades, shattering glass and tearing steel mesh. In the chaos, hundreds of pythons vanished into the sawgrass. At the same time, overwhelmed pet owners were driving to the edge of the swamp and setting free snakes that had grown too large to manage. What they thought was an act of mercy was actually the first shot in an ecological war. For years, these snakes were ghosts. The Everglades is a vast one. 5 million acre labyrinth of limestone, cypress, and razor-sharp sawgrass. It is a place where a 20-foot snake can disappear in 6 inches of water. By the time we realized we had a problem, it was already too late. The pet had become the predator. By the mid-2000s, the silent apocalypse was no longer silent. Scientists began noticing something terrifying. The Everglades, once teeming with the sounds of life, were going quiet. Marsh rabbits, which used to be the popcorn of the ecosystem found everywhere, had been wiped out by 99%. Raccoon populations plummeted. Opossums, foxes, and even bobcats were vanishing from the southern reaches of the park. Python is a generalist predator. It doesn't care if it's eating a rare bird, a family's pet dog, or a 100-pound white-tailed deer. They possess a chemical invisibility. Because they were new to the environment, the native mammals of Florida didn't have the evolutionary fear programmed into them. A rabbit wouldn't run from a python because it didn't know what a python was until the coils tightened. Current estimates suggest there are now between 100,000 and 300,000 pythons slithering through Florida. To put that in perspective, if you line them up head to tail, they could stretch from Miami to New York City and back. This isn't just an infestation, it is a total biological takeover. Every year, Florida holds the Python Challenge. It makes for great television. Hundreds of people from across the country descend on the swamp with snake hooks and GPS trackers, lured by the promise of cash prizes. We see the photos of 7-foot monsters being hauled out of the brush, and we feel a sense of victory. But here's the cold, hard truth. It's mostly theater. In 2024, nearly 1,000 hunters removed less than 200 snakes. In a population of hundreds of thousands, that is a statistical zero. Professional hunters, like the legendary Donna Khalil, work through the night, luring snakes onto the roads with the heat of the asphalt. They are the best in the world, yet even they admit that for every snake they catch, 100 more are watching them from the grass, invisible to the human eye. When the hunters couldn't keep up, we turned to Silicon Valley. Engineers developed robotic rabbits. These were $4,000 machines designed to move, smell, and even breathe like a real rabbit, emitting a heat signature that a python's infrared sensing pits couldn't resist. The idea was to lure the snakes out of the unreachable zones and into traps. We used AI-powered cameras that could distinguish the slither of a python from the crawl of an alligator. We used infrared drones to scan the canopy at night. We even trained python sniffing dogs. But the Everglades is a harsh mistress for technology. Humidity destroys circuits. Limestone holes swallow robots. And the pythons? They adapted. They stayed deeper in the water where our sensors couldn't reach. It became clear. To catch a snake that has perfected millions of years of stealth, we didn't need more silicon, we needed more biology. The most effective human strategy wasn't a robot, it was a traitor. This is the Judas Snake program. Researchers capture a large male python, perform surgery to implant a radio transmitter, and name him. Snakes like Luther or Loki are then released back into the wild. During the breeding season, these males do the work for us. They follow the pheromone trails of reproductive females. Eventually, a single Judas snake leads a team of scientists directly to a breeding ball. The impact of a single Judas snake is massive. When a team follows a scout, they don't just find one snake, they often find a massive 50-pound female surrounded by multiple males. By removing that one female, we aren't just removing one predator, we are preventing 60 to 100 hatchlings from ever entering the swamp. Since the program started, the traitor snakes have helped prevent over 20,000 python eggs from hatching. It is a war of attrition. But as effective as the Judas snakes are, they are expensive to maintain, and the work is backbreaking. We were winning small battles, but we were still losing the war. And then, we discovered that the pythons had brought a secret weapon of their own, one that was starting to backfire. While the world was fixated on the sight of 5-foot constrictors battling alligators, a much smaller, much more terrifying invader was slipping through the cracks. Its name is Rayleigh orientalis, the Asiatic snake lungworm. This wasn't a predator that killed with muscle. It was a parasite that killed from the inside out. The lungworm traveled to Florida inside the Burmese pythons. In their native Asia, the pythons and the lungworms have reached an evolutionary truce. The pythons carry them, but they don't usually die from them. But the Florida Everglades was a clean slate. When the pythons began defecating in the swamp, they released millions of microscopic lungworm eggs into the water and soil. Here is where the story takes a dark, cinematic turn. The eggs were eaten by cockroaches and intermediate hosts. Those insects were then eaten by frogs and lizards. Finally, Florida's native snakes, the king snakes, the racers, and the water snakes ate those lizards. The result was a biological catastrophe. Unlike the pythons, Florida's native snakes had zero immunity. The lungworms would migrate to the snake's lungs, grow up to several inches long, and begin draining the animal of blood and oxygen. Scientists began finding native snakes dead, with dozens of worms literally crawling out of their mouths. This was the breaking point. We weren't just losing mammals to the pythons, we were losing our native border patrol, the local snakes that keep the ecosystem in balance to a microscopic parasite. If the native snakes died out, there would be nothing left to stop the pythons. We needed a hero. We needed a survivor. In late 2024, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission made an announcement that set social media on fire. They were going to release hundreds of eastern indigo snakes into the wild. The headlines were brutal. Florida's genius plan: solve a snake problem by adding more snakes. The memes showed houses on fire with people throwing more gasoline on them. To the average person, it sounded like the ultimate Florida man story. But behind the scenes, this wasn't a desperate gamble. It was a calculated, decade-long scientific restoration. The eastern indigo snake is the longest native snake in North America, reaching up to 9 feet. It is a sleek, iridescent blue-black predator that looks like it's made of liquid midnight. And it has one specific trait that makes it the special forces of the swamp. It is an ophiophage. It specializes in eating other snakes. Why the indigo? Because for millions of years, the indigo snake was the emperor of the Southeast. It is non-venomous to humans, surprisingly docile when handled by researchers, but a nightmare for other reptiles. It is immune to the venom of rattlesnakes and cottonmouths. It doesn't constrict its prey, it simply overpowers them with massive, muscular jaws and swallows them alive. Crucially, the indigo snake is a generalist that occupies the same burrows gopher tortoise holes that pythons like to use for nesting. By releasing indigo, scientists weren't just adding snakes, they were reintroducing the landlord. The hope was simple but bold. The indigos would hunt the juvenile pythons before they grew too large to handle. One indigo snake can patrol a territory of hundreds of acres, acting as a natural seek and destroy unit for python hatchlings. Every 2-foot python eaten by an indigo today is one less 15-foot monster we have to hunt in 10 years. The laughter started to fade when the first trail camera footage emerged. A released indigo snake, barely 5 years old, slamming its jaws shut on a young Burmese python. The home team finally had a captain. For 20 years, we've seen the viral videos, a massive python constricting an alligator, or even exploding after trying to swallow one. These images created a narrative that the American alligator, the ancient armored king of the Everglades, had been dethroned. But nature doesn't give up its crown that easily. Evolution is a slow grind, but once it starts moving, it's unstoppable. Scientists are now documenting a behavioral shift in the alligator population. In the early days of the invasion, alligators didn't recognize pythons as food. They saw them as a strange alien rope. They lacked the predatory script to attack them. But today, the old king is learning. Wildlife cameras are capturing incredible footage of alligators actively stalking pythons. They aren't just defending themselves anymore, they are hunting. When an alligator grabs a 6-foot python, it doesn't just bite, it performs the death roll. It uses thousands of pounds of hydraulic pressure to snap the snake's spine and then drowns it in the black water. In some areas of the northern Everglades, pythons are now appearing in the stomach contents of nearly 1 in every 4 adult alligators. The message is clear. The buffet is over, and the pythons are now on the menu. While the alligator provides the muscle, another native hero is providing the sabotage. The Florida bobcat is a ghost of the scrub, a 40-pound ball of fur and fury that usually hunts rabbits and birds. But since the mammal collapsed, the bobcat has had to adapt or starve. And boy, has it adapted. In a stunning piece of footage captured by the USGS, a bobcat was filmed discovering a Burmese python nest. The mother python, a 15-foot monster, was away, likely hunting. The bobcat didn't just eat one egg, it raided the nest repeatedly over several days. It would dig up the eggs, puncture them with its claws, and eat the high-protein embryos. This is ecological warfare at its finest. One bobcat destroying a nest of 60 eggs is more effective than 10 professional hunters catching 10 adult snakes. The bobcat is striking at the next generation. It is a saboteur in the grass, ensuring that for every python that reaches adulthood, dozens more never make it out of the shell. The most elusive predator in the United States is the Florida panther. With only about 200 left in the wild, these big cats are the soul of the Everglades. For a long time, we feared the pythons would wipe them out by eating their kittens or stealing their prey. But the panther is a master of the ambush. Recent GPS collar data shows panthers are spending more time in heavy python zones. Why? Because they've discovered that a python is a slow-moving, calorie-dense meal. A panther can kill a 10-foot python with a single, precise bite to the back of the head, crushing the skull instantly. Unlike humans, who need flashlights and trucks, the panther hunts in total silence and perfect darkness. It is the ultimate night stalker, and it is starting to reclaim the cypress domes that the pythons tried to steal. What we are witnessing is community-level adaptation. It's not just one species, it's a collective response. The birds are learning to recognize python silhouettes. The turtles are moving deeper into the sawgrass. Even the vegetation is reacting to the change in nutrient flows. When Florida decided to release the indigo snakes, they weren't just adding another player to the game, they were providing a catalyst. The presence of a native apex snake seems to have rebooted the ecosystem's defensive instincts. The home team, the alligators, the bobcats, the panthers, and the indigos is finally synchronized. The snake killers weren't just the indigos. The snake killer is the Everglades itself. As we moved into the 2025 to 2026 season, the laughter from the skeptics didn't just fade, it vanished. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission released their most comprehensive report yet. For the first time in 30 years, the estimated population of Burmese pythons in specific restoration zones has stopped growing. In some core areas of the southern Everglades, the number of juvenile pythons sighted has actually dropped by 15%. Why? Because the bidirectional attack is working. On one side, the professional hunters and Judas snakes are taking out the 100-pound breeding females. On the other side, the released eastern indigo snakes are patrolling the gopher tortoise burrows, eating the python hatchlings before they ever see their first sunset. One specific indigo snake, a 6-foot male tagged as Emperor 09, has become a legend among researchers. Over a 6-month period, his GPS data showed him visiting 4 different python nesting sites. When researchers moved in to verify, they found empty eggshells and no juvenile pythons. Emperor 09 wasn't just surviving, he was clearing the block. The most beautiful data isn't about the snakes we killed, it's about the life that's coming back. In the areas where indigo snakes and alligators have reclaimed control, the mammal collapse is reversing. For the first time in a decade, sightings of marsh rabbits are increasing. The nocturnal chatter of raccoons and opossums is returning to the cypress domes. This is the trophic cascade in reverse. By putting the apex predator back in the seat, the entire pyramid below it begins to stabilize. The birds are nesting again without their eggs being sucked dry by a slithering ghost. The deer are fawning in the high grass with a slightly better chance of reaching adulthood. We aren't just killing snakes, we are gardening in the wilderness. Florida's journey from mockery to a global conservation model is a lesson in humility for the human race. We spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to outsmart a snake with silicon. We built robots, we coded AI, we flew multi-million-dollar drones. But in the end, the most sophisticated technology on Earth was a 9-foot blue-black snake that had evolved for this exact purpose for 6 million years. We learned that you cannot engineer your way out of attack, biological disaster using only cold steel and code. You have to work with the system, not just on top of it. The release of the snake killers was a submission to the wisdom of the ecosystem. It was an admission that nature knows how to heal itself if we just give it the right tools and get out of the way. Make no mistake, the Burmese python is here to stay. They are too deeply embedded in the limestone and the muck to ever be truly zeroed out. Florida will likely always have pythons, but the nightmare scenario, the total collapse of the Everglades, has been averted. The Everglades is no longer a victim. It is a combatant. It is a living, breathing, biting machine that has integrated the invader into its own brutal logic. The pythons came for a feast, but they stayed for a fight. And as the eastern indigo snakes slide through the grass and the alligators watch from the dark water, the message to any future invader is loud and clear. This land is taken. To truly understand the war in the Everglades, we have to look into the eyes of the people on the front lines. These aren't just contractors collecting a paycheck. They are a unique breed of modern-day gladiators. For people like Donna Khalil or the Python Action Team, the hunt isn't a hobby, it's an obsession that takes a physical and mental toll. Imagine standing in waist-deep black water at 3 a.m. The humidity is so thick you can feel it in your lungs. Every step is a gamble against jagged limestone holes and submerged cypress knees. Your only light is a headlamp that attracts swarms of mosquitoes so dense they look like smoke. And somewhere in that darkness is a 150-pound mussel, with a mouthful of backward-curving teeth waiting for you to make a mistake. The psychological pressure is immense. You aren't just looking for a snake, you are looking for a needle in a hayfield of needles. The python fatigue is a real phenomenon. Hunters spend weeks without a single catch, driving thousands of miles on the levee roads, staring until their eyes burn. But when they finally spot that slight, unnatural shimmer in the grass, the adrenaline hit is like a drug. But there's a darker side to the hunt. Many hunters speak of a strange respect, even a mourning, for the animals they kill. These pythons didn't ask to be here. They are magnificent, powerful creatures that are simply doing what nature programmed them to do, survive. Every time a hunter is forced to euthanize a record-breaking female, there is a silent acknowledgement of the tragedy. We are killing a masterpiece of evolution because we, as humans, made a mistake 30 years ago. The hunters carry the weight of that guilt for all of us. We've called the eastern indigo the snake killer, but let's look at the specifications of this biological weapon. If the Burmese python is a heavy tank, slow, massive, and powerful, then the eastern indigo is a high-speed interceptor. First, let's talk about the scales. The indigo's skin isn't just for show. Those iridescent blue-black scales are incredibly thick and smooth. When a python tries to wrap around an indigo, it finds it almost impossible to get a grip. Indigo is like a bar of wet soap made of pure muscle. It can slide out of constricting coils that would crush a human's ribcage in seconds. Second, the immunity. This is indigo's superpower. Within its blood, the indigo carries specialized proteins that neutralize the complex hemotoxins and neurotoxins of North American pit vipers. When an indigo hunts a diamondback rattlesnake, it doesn't care if it gets bitten. It takes the strike, feels the venom, and keeps eating. This physiological shield allows the indigo to dominate the underground burrows where other predators fear to tread. Third, the jaw structure. Most snakes have elastic jaws meant for swallowing prey whole after it's dead. The indigo, however, has an incredibly powerful bite force for a non-venomous snake. It doesn't wait for its prey to stop struggling. It uses its massive head to slam the prey against the ground or the walls of a burrow, literally stunning the animal before consumption. When you release an indigo into a python nesting site, you aren't just releasing a predator, you are releasing a specialist. The hatchling pythons, with their soft bones and slow movements, have no defense against a 9-foot indigo that can move through the grass at nearly 5 miles per hour. The indigo is the natural correction to the python's unnatural invasion. The world is watching Florida. From the brown tree snakes in Guam to the feral hogs in Australia and the invasive carp in the Great Lakes, every nation is struggling with biological invaders. For decades, the global standard for invasive species management was poison and pull. We sprayed chemicals or we tried to trap every individual. Florida's snake killer program has proven that there is a third way: trophic restoration. By spending the time to breed and reintroduce the eastern indigo, Florida has shown that fighting nature with nature isn't just a poetic idea. The success of the indigo release is now being studied by scientists in Hawaii and the Galapagos. We are learning that an ecosystem is like a complex machine. When a gear and apex predator falls out, the whole machine grinds to a halt. You can't fix it by throwing hammers at it, you have to put the gear back in. The war for the Everglades doesn't end when the sun goes down. In fact, that is when the most brutal chapters are written. To understand why the release of the indigo snake is so pivotal, we have to look at the sensory arms race occurring in the pitch-black heart of the swamp. The Burmese python possesses a biological superpower: labial heat-sensing pits. These organs allow the snake to see thermal radiation. In the dark, a warm-blooded marsh rabbit or a nesting bird isn't just a shadow, it is a glowing, radiant target. For decades, this gave the pythons an absolute advantage. Florida's native mammals had no evolutionary script to hide their heat signatures from a predator that sees in infrared. But nature is beginning to patch its software. Biologists are observing a phenomenon known as adaptive shift. Native species are undergoing rapid behavioral evolution to counter the python's heat vision. Take the Florida bobcat. These 40-pound predators are traditionally ground hunters. However, in high python zones, bobcats are spending significantly more time in the high canopy or on dry limestone ridges. By shifting their thermal terrain, they are effectively jamming the python's radar. They are learning to stay off the damp, cool mud where their body heat stands out like a flare. Even more incredible is the epigenetic response seen in native snakes. The survivors of the lungworm plague are passing down a reinforced immune system to their offspring. New generations of cottonmouths, water moccasins, are showing an ability to encapsulate the invasive parasites within their connective tissues, preventing the worms from reaching the lungs. This isn't just survival, it is the Everglades upgrading its defenders in real time. The home team is literally recording its DNA to fight back. Beyond individual survival, we are seeing a genetic wake-up call across the entire ecosystem. This is what scientists call rapid phenotypic plasticity, the ability of an organism to change its physical traits or behaviors within a single generation in response to an environmental shock. For thousands of years, Florida's native snakes, like the king snake, were the undisputed masters of the undergrowth. When the pythons arrived, these native kings were overwhelmed by the sheer size of the invaders. But recent laboratory tests show something startling. Hatchling king snakes that have never seen a python show an immediate, aggressive defensive posture when exposed to python scent. This suggests that the predatory memory is being hardwired into the native population. The presence of the indigo snake, the emperor, acts as a biological catalyst. By reintroducing the indigo, we are effectively rebooting the defensive instincts of the entire swamp. The indigo creates a landscape of fear. When young pythons are hunted by indigos, they become stressed, move less, and eat less. This non-consumptive effect slows down the python's growth rate, giving the rest of the ecosystem a fighting chance to catch up. Furthermore, we are seeing changes in the Everglades snail kite. This bird of prey, once nearly extinct, has evolved a larger, more powerful beak in less than a decade to handle the invasive snails that followed the pythons. This is the new Everglades, a place where evolution has been kicked into overdrive. The swamp is no longer a passive victim, it is a laboratory of defiance. The story of the Florida Everglades is a story of resilience. It's a reminder that even when we make catastrophic mistakes, there is a path back to balance. The snake killers weren't just the indigos, the alligators, or the hunters. The real snake killer is the collective will of people who refuse to let an ancient paradise die. If you found this journey through the swamp valuable, hit that like button. It helps us tell the stories that the headlines miss. Subscribe and hit the notification bell to join us on our next deep dive into the mysteries of our changing world. Leave a comment below. Do you think Florida made the right call? Would you trust a 9-foot emperor to save your backyard? Thank you for watching, for caring about the wild places, and for staying until the very end. We'll see you in the next one.